So, as I was preparing for this evening, I realized that a lot of you have heard this before, at least a fair number of you have heard this before, and didn't want it to be exactly the same, but on the same hand, on the other hand, and on the same hand, you got new people who also have to hear some of the older stuff. And so I hope I found a balance. I tried to add some new things in it. Of course, then I just found out that one of your planning commission members was at the Warrenton training that we did last week, so he could probably get up here and give most of the presentation. So thank you for now making it even more stressful for me. So I'm sorry that you can't see this on the phone, so I'm just, I'll try and make sure that I call out any highlights, all right? So one of the things that I do want to talk about is just the history of land use. And so I know we've got a bunch of different commissions here, Historic Land Commission, tell me what the title is again?
Historic Landmark.
Historic Landmark, and then we have the Design Review Team, and then we've got the Lower Columbia Preservation. So you might be saying, why am I sitting here in a land use discussion? And really, that's why you're out there. So all of this does tie together. Not all it's going to be relevant to what each of you do, but hopefully a bigger picture is very relevant. But I want to just give you a quick rundown of the history of land use in Oregon. We talk a lot about land use starting in the 70s, but it didn't. It's actually been around a very long time, almost well over 100 years now. 1919, cities began zoning private land, and then in 1947, the counties did. 1963 is kind of a pivotal year, and then that's when we decided to start zoning exclusive farm use lands and the uses that are allowed on it. And that's really one of the drivers for our current land use system. And then in 1973, Senate Bill 100, which is what we all generally associate with land use, came into being, and it created the Land Conservation and Development Commission, which was tasked with creating the statewide planning goals, of which we have 19. The first 14 goals were done in 1975. Goal 15 was adopted in 75 as well. I separated it out because it's not particularly relevant here. I also see I didn't change the name. You would be interested to know Warrenton's plan was acknowledged in 1980, which is of absolutely no use to you all. But Astoria was one of the earlier ones as well. Everything was approved, acknowledged in the mid-80s. Goal 16 and 19, so we have estuaries, shorelands, beaches and dunes, and ocean planning. That was all adopted in 76, and then in 1977, a unique program came to the state of Oregon, the Oregon Coastal Management Program, which is through NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They are the federal agency that oversees the implementation of the Coastal Zone Management Act, and out of that, coastal states have the opportunity to participate in the coastal management program. Oregon was the second state to move into the I'll keep wanting to call it Oregon, because that's my name of the program I work for as well. Moved into the coastal management program, and the state of Oregon elected to put it under its land use agency. And it makes good sense. It all ties back in at the end of the day. Coastal zone management is about how we manage our resources, whether it's how we utilize them, how we plan for them. It's ocean, it's fresh water, it's land uses, and it extends from the Coast Range 3 miles out, the territorial sea. So it takes in the entire coastline. It takes in places, and that's why forests and farms are included in the coastal zone, because it extends that full strip along the coastal range. And then our most furthest inland community that's in the coastal zone is Vernonia, which is in Columbia County. And that is because of the Nehalem River. The Nehalem is considered coastal all the way to the top of its headwaters, and its headwaters actually extend through both Clatsop, Tillamook, and Columbia County. So it's also one of our longest bodies of water in the coastal zone. We're very fortunate to have that program here, and I'll tell you why a little bit later. But its primary focus is to make sure that federal, state, and local plans are all consistent with one another. And the reason that that's important is that a lot of the power sits at the local level. State agencies are not allowed to issue permits that are inconsistent with local plans. Federal agencies are not allowed to issue permits that are not in compliance with local plans. And we set it up purposely to give local jurisdictions that additional power, for lack of a better word, to ensure that what's happening in their communities is consistent with the vision that they've laid out for themselves through comprehensive plans. First part of this whole process in land use is citizen involvement, which is you all. Goal 1 is the foundation of land use in terms of if and how it's going to succeed. The idea of Goal 1 is to ensure that all citizens have the right and the opportunities to participate in the land use process and in all phases of the land use process. And something that we're talking about a lot now, and probably should have always been talking a lot about, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so when we are talking about planning commissions representing your communities, it's the full suite. It's not just men, women, which was really one of the biggest demographics that we would look at when we're talking about, is that a diverse board or is that a diverse commission? It's intended to represent all of the facets of your community. One board cannot do that, and in this city you have a lot of committees, and increasing the ability for anyone and everyone to participate on those committees is what ensures that what you're doing is actually having a positive impact on all of the members in your community as best as it can. So this is, I say this every time, and I will show you this slide 1,000 times, and I'm going to say the same thing every time. This does not actually adequately represent how land use works. So it is true at the top, you've got the statewide planning goals and the revised statutes that sort of set the overlying umbrella of how land use is going to look. Some of it's prescriptive, but as a rule, it does provide enough latitude for local communities to create visions that are representative of the uniqueness of their communities. And then you move through and you take all those and you create your comprehensive plan, which is your guiding document, and then you have your ordinances, which implement your comprehensive plan, and then your local decisions are made really using all of these things. But what this fails to show is the arrows going back up. Because although all of this helps guide how you came to a local decision, the local decision is also the definitive part of the land use process. So it influences, your decisions are not only influenced from the top, but in Oregon, it is a much more grassroots approach to land use than it is just about anywhere else. And so the local, what this would look like is the bottom, is also actually at the top of the pyramid as well, because you have the power through the comprehensive planning process and through your implementing ordinances to ensure that the state also is recognizing the uniqueness of your communities. So the responsibilities of the state are, we set the policy for land use, we acknowledge your comprehensive plans and your ordinances, we enforce the 19 goals to make sure that cities and counties are actually instituting those goals in an appropriate way. We look at plan amendments, which is what happens when you decide to make a change to your comprehensive plan. We administer periodic review, which no cities under 10,000 have to go through anymore. It was originally intended to encourage, even though it's a requirement, to encourage communities to revisit their comprehensive plans to make sure they were consistent with any changes at the state level and to make sure it was actually still reflective of what the community wanted. Well, if every city, 250 plus cities, and every county, 36 counties, had to go through this on a regular basis, you can imagine the workload that started to pile up, and it became burdensome at state level, and it was frankly a burden on local communities in a lot of ways because it was expensive quite often. It was very time consuming, and it sometimes felt like you just got out of periodic review only to go back into it again. And so it was this perpetual planning process. So they set a limit of population, whatever that threshold made sense, I'm not sure, but 10,000. And the consequence of that is that people quit going through periodic review. So it wasn't that motivation to review plans and to review your ordinances on any kind of regular cycle. And so we started running, and perhaps you've seen this yourselves, I'm not sure, but particularly at the counties, you start seeing a lot of plan amendments coming through where they're making very isolated changes to their plan without looking at the full complement. So now you're getting plans that are starting parts of the plans are not talking to each other anymore. And so a great example really is Clatsop County. They had a whole new staff came in, recognized this, and now they're going through this full-blown comprehensive plan update, 3-year process, heavy on the public engagement side, and they're revisiting every goal that applies to Clatsop County and rewriting them. So hopefully they won't have to do that for a while once it's acknowledged, and when they're going through their updates, they're doing it now with the whole picture in mind instead of parts as parts. So we also provide technical assistance. Yes, sir.
So when you say periodic review, what's the period? Is it how often?
Yeah, it was every 10 years.
So, okay, because we're under 10,000, but
I know.
right? So if we go over 10,000, does that trigger us to immediately go into it?
So
what would be our situation?
So that is a good question because, and I will actually look into that. I was tempted to answer it on the fly, but I should not because common sense and what may actually happen may not be tied together. But it would strike me that there's going to be a period of time. First, because you had 20 people moved in, that would push you over 10,000, and then 40 people left, and now you're below it. I think there's also probably a little bit of a threshold, like a consistency of population. Yeah, but I will look into that. That's a super good question. So, and please feel free to ask questions at any point because it's more interesting for me, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be more interesting for you because questions are what you're interested in. So make sure that you ask.
I should say, are vacationing property owners considered part of our city's population?
They are not unless they own the property.
Well, yes, but we seem to have an increasing number of...
Oh, second homes. No, I'm sorry. No, the answer is
Well, it depends on where they are counted when the census is taken.
so if this is their residence versus they have a second home. So their residence or primary residence is Portland, that's where they'll count. But as you see, a lot of people buy the second homes and transition over into this becomes their primary location. One of the other things that hopefully the cities and counties find important is that you actually have a liaison from the department that assists all of the different regions. You guys are in the North Coast, and the North Coast is comprised of all of Columbia County and 2 cities, Clanskillenai and Vernonia. All of Clatsop County and the cities, all of Tillamook County and the cities, and all of the unincorporated area in Lincoln County and 5 of the 7 cities. So it's a pretty big range. But every region has a rep, and our job is to be a technical resource to the city, to connect you to agencies, help you through issues, be your advocate, which is something that I look at as being a primary focus of my job is advocating for my communities. The state can also provide some dollars, not a lot anymore, and they're pretty competitive. But sometimes dollars do become available, and then technical support. So not only do you have a regional rep, but then you have a whole department of experts in various aspects of the land use program, which I rely on a lot. When you ask me questions, we have people who focus on very specific issues, and I get to be kind of a generalist. So the areas that I'm very well attuned to are coastal goals, which is what I did for 9 years wholly. But when you start getting into some of the more technical pieces, I'm very grateful to have that support. And they are extremely helpful, and that is their job too. They look at themselves as a resource for the communities. So cities and counties have some jobs too. Your job is to adopt your comprehensive plan and ordinances that implement those plans and their consistency with the statewide planning goals. It's your job to make sure that these plans address your local vision and needs. You make land use decisions. You are the decision-making bodies, and it only gets to the state level when there are appeals for most decisions. You enforce your code and ordinances, and you also provide a great resource to your community by helping folks through what is all a very complicated process. So goal 2, this sets the stage for land use. This is the actual name of the goal is land use. And this is the goal that requires local governments to develop and adopt comprehensive plans and implementing ordinances that carry out the goals and interests of statewide planning goals. So what that means is you have to have comprehensive plans that are based on facts, that they're based on science when necessary, that you're following your plans when you're making your zoning decisions. A lot of goal to set the stage for that initial part of planning. So sometimes when you read it and you're like, well, I've had a comp plan in place for 40 years and it feels like this is telling me to start over. It's not. It really is the foundational goal in terms of how to land use planning. Goal 1 is how land use planning actually gets accomplished, which is through the people, through the public process. Your comprehensive plans must comply with all the requirements of the statewide planning goals. And also your plans must be consistent with one another, so counties and cities can't have dueling plans. Special districts and state agencies, like I was mentioning, have to have plans that are coordinated with your program, with your programs and comprehensive plans. And these are the 19 statewide planning goals. Does everybody, if I had not put this up, would you know what they are? And that's going to be my next test. So we've already talked about 2. The city generally doesn't have to deal with agricultural lands or forest lands.
What we do.
But we do.
Oh, you do here. That's
Yes.
true. Very good. So that's an interesting twist. Not all cities have to deal with resource lands, which is what we call agricultural and forest lands. And then you have natural resources, not to be confused with resource lands. Goal 5 is a catch-all. It is natural resources, scenic and historic areas, open spaces. It's also rock quarries and cultural resources. I feel like they went through, they developed all 19 and said, oh darn it, we missed some. Picked goal 5 and dumped them in. But it's also the most nebulous of the goals too. There aren't a lot of ORSs and OERs that actually implement aspects of some of these. So it's really guidance as opposed to any prescriptive approach to planning around these goal 5 issues. And then you have air, water, and land resources. It's a little squishy too. Goal 7, which many of you are familiar with, these are your geologic hazards. You've only got a couple here. They're all bad. And then, yeah, and then you have, and the black part's probably going to hit by a tsunami or the earthquake. So then you have goal 8, which is recreation, goal 9 and 10, very integrated into city planning. So that's economic development and housing, public facilities and services, transportation, energy conservation, which I think we're going to see become a little more prevalent as we have more and more discussions about climate change and carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emissions and how planning can help communities impact that in a positive way. Goal 14 is urbanization, and then our 4 coastal goals: estuarine, shorelands, beaches, and dunes, and oceans. No jurisdiction plans in the ocean. That's at a state level. That's the only goal that is solely at the state level. So your comp plans are your vision. They are your guiding document. When there are conflicts between your land use ordinance and your comprehensive plan is going to win, almost always. Again, it's factually based, and it's looking at environmental, social, economic, and energy criteria when it's pulling an analysis. It's called an EC analysis. Environment, social, economic, energy, and so it's sort of the lenses that you're looking through when you're evaluating changes to your goals, or in this case, when it was creating your comprehensive plan. And they all have goals, policies, they have objectives, and then they have maps of what your land looks like now and what you presume that will look like in the future, and that includes your zoning. Whereas your zoning and development code are very specific. Those are your criteria and standards for how those goals get implemented as best they can be. You hold their clear and objective standards. And those standards must be met in order to approve any application. This is sort of where we get to the different types of committees that you have. You have standards that you need to review your applications against, and if it can meet those standards, it's approved, and if it can't, it isn't, unless perhaps you could put a condition of approval on to help make it meet that standard. So you have several different types of decisions that you make at the land use level. So the first one is legislative. Those are your big items of land use, so your policies and ordinances. Generally applies to a large geography, generally a large group of people. In a legislative action, no decision ever has to be made. The city council or city commission, depending on where you are, can say, well, you know what, we've heard a lot of testimony, we're just not going to move forward with this. This is very different from a quasi-judicial decision, which we'll talk about in a second. And in this decision type process, the planning commission makes recommendations. The city council is going to say. Whereas a quasi-judicial decision is a set of standards in your ordinances that are already existing, may affect one or a handful of property owners. A city or a county have to take action. There's a mandated period of time in which a community, in which a jurisdiction has to make a decision on a land use action that's been deemed complete and is going through the process. In the case of cities, it's 120 days. In the case of counties, it's 150. The Plan Commission is generally the final decision unless it gets appealed. So this is an important body. They do make a lot of decisions for your community, and they're all volunteers, and it's important to remember that.
So Lisa, with this Astoria, we have 3 land use commissions. We have the Planning Commission, the Historic Landmarks
Right.
Commission, and the Design Review Commission.
Right.
So all of those entities are reviewing quasi-judicial land use
Okay.
applications, which could then be appealed to the city council.
So all your commissions are the final decision makers
That is correct.
unless.
That is correct.
Oh, very cool. The other thing about these is the opportunities for hearings are required, at least one. The opportunity for it. You don't have to have a hearing for a quasi-judicial decision, but if someone requests it, or the city makes a decision that it's actually going to be a little bigger than your garden variety variance or conditional use, they can bring it to your planning commission. The other piece about a quasi-judicial decision is that your decision makers, I'm just going to, because I don't think I talk about this anywhere else. Your decision makers, as I mentioned, are all volunteers. And these situations can get pretty heated sometimes, as you can imagine. I'm sure it doesn't happen in Astoria where there's contention, but you know, when I look out at the audience and what I see are very dedicated people, because I'm just going to soapbox here for a minute, because you're looking your neighbors in the face, sometimes your family members in the face, and you might have to make decisions that are not going to make them very happy. And then you need to go home and either see them or go have dinner with them the next night. And one of the things that I have admired about every planning commission that I have ever engaged with, and I'm sure your other 2 commissions as well are representative of this, is that the commission members take their job very seriously. And when I hold trainings for the public, I always say, you know, we all understand these are passionate issues. Land use is one of the most passionate legal issues that an individual can engage in. And what they need to do when they go up to this table is the first thing they need to do is thank the commission members for their time and service to their community. One thing that does is it makes them pause and remember that these are people who are their neighbors and their family and friends. And it makes them take a step back. And then I said, then you can say you hate it. But when you say you hate it, it needs to be followed up by why you hate it. I hate it as not good testimony. I hate it because it's not good testimony. It might work as a parent to say because I said so, but it doesn't work in the world of providing good testimony. And so when you are holding your meetings, helping guide the public through the testimony process, and usually that's the chair's job, is very valuable both for them and for the Planning Commission, because what you want is testimony that's actually going to have value towards the decision. And so setting up the ground rules before people come up to testify, repeating probably several times the criteria. You have to read it at the start of your hearing, but repeating it during the process, especially if people are starting to wander, is helpful. Helping guide the person back to, because it's also scary to get up here, and even though you might know everybody up there, it's a little different. When you're sitting down here and everybody's up here and they're staring at you. It gets a little intimidating, especially if you've got a whole crowd of people behind you. It's scary. People don't like public speaking as a rule. You know, it's a necessary evil for some people. I'm an introvert by nature, an extrovert out of necessity, and not everybody can flip that switch, and helping them be comfortable and giving them some sideboards is going to make their testimony a lot better and your job's a lot easier. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. These are ministerial actions. This happens at the staff level. It's usually about a property or an action. There's generally no hearing is required or usually associated with a ministerial action. If there were, then that would suggest that there is discretion that's being used, and so it wouldn't apply here. But this would be like looking at a building permit and making sure that the setbacks are accurate, and that height is what it's supposed to be. Those are very clear, objective standards, check, the decision's done. This is just some notice requirements. I would encourage you to ask Blair if you want more information on noticing itself. But there are, as a rule, there are prescribed notice requirements for 2 of the 3 types of actions that come in front of communities. Your legislative is a very broad brush of notice that goes out to many people, whereas quasi-judicial is a prescribed distance from a property that a project being proposed on.
Lisa, can I chime in on
Yeah.
that? So, on the ballot measure 56 notice, this is something that happens whenever there are code amendments which are taking place, and we have to provide notice to people who could be affected. So whenever we have large sweeping code amendments that could affect the entire city, we try to aggregate those together at the same time, because we're having to send out 7,000 notices, which has a cost to the city. And also that language, by the ballot measure initiative as well. The voters of Oregon said our notice has to say, this code amendment may or may not affect your property values. So when Jane or Joe Q citizen get that in their mailbox, the community development department is manning the phones constantly with calls whenever that happens. So just kind of something to kind of understand. It's a nuance that was actually put into place by voter initiative.
And it's also a good way to get the public involved. So, see, that's a positive spin to that. So I'm going to quickly go over the hearings process. This is all prescribed in ORS 197, which governs the hearings process, among other things, for jurisdictions. But your chair is going to open the hearing, describes the proceedings, asks for the raise it or waive it statement, provides a raise it or waive it statement, which means essentially that if you do not raise an issue during that hearing and a decision is made at that hearing, then you do not have a right to appeal that decision based on the issue you did not raise. So if you have concerns and you want to get them out there, you need to get them on the record and make sure that the hearing body has considered it in their decision-making process. The chair is then going to talk about what the criteria is and then ask for declarations of ex parte, bias, and conflict of interest. And we'll talk about that more. And Blair is going to be your go-to guy for that. Your staff report is going to talk about the proposed findings and recommendations. Sometimes I've seen situations where staff does not make a recommendation. That usually leaves everybody up in a little bit of turmoil, but there are reasons for it. And then in the testimony process, you have the applicant, you have proponents, you have opponents, so they are separated into groups, and then you have neutral, the person that just didn't have anything else to do that night and wanted to comment on the action. And then the applicant has the last word. They get to rebut what has been said that evening. You can request a continuance at the first hearing, a quasi-judicial hearing, and it has to be left open. The time is somewhat negotiable, but it's at least 7 days, and but it can be longer. It really depends sometimes on the complexity of the issue or perhaps a capacity issue. In a legislative hearing, this is much more free-for-all. Everyone can participate. There are no pros and cons. You come up as your name's called. There are no concerns with ex parte or bias, but conflict of interest is still an issue. And the reason there's no issues around bias is it's a legislative process. You can lobby your city councilor for your position. They may have run on this issue. Because it's legislative, it is much more, I guess the word that I keep coming back to is it's a much more open process. So findings are important for all of you who are decision makers. Your findings include relevant facts, how you have determined that the criteria have been satisfied, and that each criteria has been satisfied. So your findings will include the consideration of each criteria, the evidence that you use, so public testimony, staff report, the applicant's presentation, and then you need to explain how your conclusions have been supported by substantial evidence. So this is sort of the obverse of what the public does when they get up here and say, I hate it, thank you. You can't say, it meets this criteria. That's the end. You need to explain how it meets the criteria. So here's some tips for making good findings. As you're going through your decision-making process and you're getting towards the end of wrapping up, you're going to identify each of the criteria. You're going to address each one separately. You're going to identify the facts that led to the conclusion for your decision, whether it met or didn't meet criteria. And as often happens, you're going to hear conflicting testimony, conflicting evidence, not just testimony, and you need to explain why you pick one over the other. If you made conditions, you need to be able to draw a direct link back to the findings. So you need to establish two things, nexus and rough proportionality. And those are two legal terms, and they've come out of several court cases. But essentially what it means is that you need to, your condition of approval needs to be substantiated by the evidence that has been provided through the process. And if you're making a condition, I think of subdivision a lot when I think of proportionality, and it's a 10 home subdivision, and you want them to fix all of Exchange Street. Probably not proportional to the impact of the subdivision. So you need to keep those things in mind. Finding is not restating the law, so if the finding is shall not impede neighboring properties' views, the finding does not impede neighboring properties' views. That can certainly be the start of it, but then it needs to be followed by why. And then something that doesn't happen as often as we'd like to think is the findings need to be clear and understandable. You don't want to get bogged down in legalese. Some of these cases just the topic lends itself to some jargon sometimes, but being conscious that you're making your findings in a way that anyone could pick it up and understand what you were trying to achieve.
I'd like to throw something in.
Yeah.
You guys are all on commissions or councils. You don't do the findings, staff does the findings. And as Lisa told you, the testimony shouldn't say, I don't like this. It's, I don't like this because this building's too high. Same thing with you when you're deliberating, and you should state the reasons why you make conclusions and state them with enough detail so the staff can pick that up and then convert what you say into good findings. Because staff can't make up the findings, so they have to a little bit, but it should be based upon what is said during your deliberations. That's something to keep in mind.
The question, when like city council is doing appeals on a quasi-judicial, does ex parte and bias,
Yes, it factors, they have to be.
they have to factor that in as well at that point? Because there's no longer legislative, it's quasi-judicial.
Yeah. So a lot of the common problems with findings are you don't address each of the criteria. You have to come up with so many conditions to make the project work that you have to consider whether or not the project can actually meet the criteria. That whole idea of generalizing a conclusion, being so vague that nobody can really figure out how you came to that conclusion, and not being able to draw a direct relationship between what you've heard and what you've decided. So now I want to go into goal 2 a little bit again. So, yes, sir.
Could you just talk about bias a little bit?
I will have a whole section on that.
You have
for
that,
human
okay.
data. Yes, sir.
I have a question back to continuances.
Yep.
So, just to confirm, anyone can request a continuance,
At
correct?
the first hearing of a quasi-judicial process.
And the hearing body would be obligated to grant the continuance?
Correct.
No matter who requests the
Correct.
continuance? Are there any circumstances you could deny a continuance?
If it's after the first hearing. So someone can come up at the second one and say, you know, I still need more time. They don't have to entertain that.
Do they have to give a reason for asking for a continuance?
No.
So anybody from the public can just get up there and do it?
That first time, yep.
Okay.
We could be on time constraint though, so we have this 120 days. We may be at the end of that, there may not be time for a continuance.
You have to grant the continuance.
But if it's quasi-judicial, it's the appeal, the person with the appeal that is allowed to grant. The council isn't allowed to grant.
What's that?
Grant extra time.
No, it's the applicant,
Yeah.
according to the 120-day rule, it is only the applicant
Right.
can grant it. And on appeal, an applicant could be an appellant, or an appellant could be another party.
Right, so there's my circumstance, we have somebody saying, I want a continuance, we have this timeline, and they are not granting the extra time.
So it came down to a case where we were running to the end of the 120-day rule. We were having a public hearing, someone requested a continuance. I would say, and I'm gonna look at Blair, I would say we grant the continuance first because it's required by law. And that would be the thing that you procedurally need to do. If we run up against or over the 103-day rule, it happened. But, you know, we need to follow the law, or else what happens is there's an automatic
Yes.
way that could get appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals because of a procedural matter.
Yeah. So it's only the first evidentiary hearing.
Yeah.
So that one in front of the planning commission. After that, it doesn't have to be required. So you don't have to keep granting continuance after continuance.
Right, just
That
for
was-
one time.
Yeah. But, you know, it does happen, or for whatever reason, a proposed application just didn't get moved through the process fast enough, workload, a whole number of things. Or maybe nobody thought it was going to really be an issue, and you can run up against that 120 days, and you hope most applicants are willing, because they want to go through the process, you know what I mean? They want to get it done the right way. They want to be good neighbors as a rule. if you're working with that person and they understand the situation, Brett will correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say 90% of the time, they're gonna say, yes, we'll extend it. But they may not be happy.
Well, and the only result of not complying with the 90-day rules, the applicant can then file what's called a writ of mandamus in the circuit court. Writ of mandamus is asking the judge to order the city to issue the permit. That process is not quick either.
Yeah.
So it could take up to a year to get that case to trial. And then at trial, if there's any discretionary rulings that the city must make in granting the permit, the circuit court can't grant. So there are a lot of pitfalls in it. The downside of the city is that the city is always going to be responsible for the attorney fees of the applicant if you prevail. So there's weight on both sides to move this thing through and to allow the process to work.
I mean, you think 4 months sounds like a lot of time, and generally it's more than sufficient, but you get a really complex project in and it's suddenly a very short timeline.
Well, I've been involved in a couple of these things,
Okay.
and they have been,
Oh, okay.
and they've been extended.
Sure.
You know, the applicant has allowed extension under the circumstances of that, but it was, I always saw that as because it benefited them to do so. And I can see them saying, well, I don't see the benefit of this continuing, why should I want to know now.
Another little nuance is the applicant can only extend a 120-day rule to a total of a 1-year period.
Yeah.
They can't let it go further than that 1-year period. That's another little nuance of that statute.
Oh, I went back, I was wondering, didn't we talk about that? Okay, so now goal 2, and when does the state get involved? So we generally don't get involved in quasi-judicial decisions unless for some reason it's been elevated to a situation where it's something indicates that it is not compliant with statewide planning goal. I had my first situation happen in a county south of here where we had to make comments that to move forward in a certain direction would be to not comply with the statewide planning goals. I wasn't my happiest mom in this job, but it had to be done. Where we do get involved, however, when you're making changes to your comprehensive plan, policies, and your ordinances. So this is called a post-acknowledgement plan amendment process, which we have called PAPA. It makes it sound warm and fuzzy instead of onerous and horrible. So, and this process adds a little bit more time because we get a notice 35 days in advance of your first hearing. That's in addition to other notices that you're required to send out. And we have that period of time to review what you're proposing for compliance with statewide planning goals and the ability to influence some of the outcomes of that, particularly when they're not in compliance. We have a great group of folks back in the office who look at ordinances specifically with a comb that is so fine. And maybe at the local level that's frustrating sometimes, but it really does help result in a better ordinance and one that's less likely to be challenged, or if it is challenged, less likely to be overturned. One of the reasons for this process is to just make sure that the public process is being honored as well, because in addition to your notice period, our notice, when we get a notice, we also notice a whole swath of people.
Also, just, you know, whatever that's happening behind the scenes, if we're, and Lisa's aware of this, if we're working on some sort of major code amendment, Lisa is our go-to person, and she's not out of the loop in terms of what our planning commission and city council is working on. So that whenever she gets one of these pop-up notices, it's rarely like, oh, it's a surprise.
Right. Not from here. It's not rarely a
I
surprise.
wanted to be able to say, that's the practice at the city of Astoria, so.
Yeah, you guys are really good about that. I have had some other jurisdictions where I seriously had talked to them that morning, and then that afternoon there's a pop-up notice, and I'm like, how can I be your advocate if I don't even know what's going on? So we usually have a long conversation, and everybody feels bad, and then that happens next time. Anyway, so another process that can happen through Goal 2 is an exception. And that means that perhaps when a property was zoned or policy was put in place, that the land that it applied to was sort of this general broad brush, but specific lands may not actually fit what was intended through that zoning or that ordinance overlay. And so it's those unique situations where it makes more sense for something else to happen there. An exception is exactly what it sounds like. It's somewhat rare, and it's a little onerous. It's hard to get through. I mean, the purpose is that you need to show us why you can't comply with statewide planning goals. And so it is intended to be a difficult process, but it can be done, and it can be done successfully. When comprehensive plans were first put into place, a lot of jurisdictions took exceptions right off the bat as they were developing their comprehensive plans, so that they were thinking ahead and getting in front of the problems that could result if they had continued without an exception. So these are just some of the goal 2 issues. We talked about periodic review. Oh, God. We talked about periodic review, the review and approval of state agency coordination programs. So there are 26 other state agencies that have a land use, finger in land use, and they must be coordinated. They must be coordinated with statewide planning goals, and they must be consistent and compatible with your local lands. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but urban growth boundaries. This is a Goal 14 issue, and every jurisdiction, every city needs to have 20 years of land available for the projected population growth. And so communities somewhat regularly go through to determine that they are in fact meeting that requirement. And when you get to the point that you're not, then you talk about extending your urban growth boundary. These are also non-controversial, very happy meetings, and that's why I don't have it now.
So on that real quick, just so the anomaly that we talked about earlier about why Astoria deals with forestry goals is our city limits is greater than our urban growth boundary, which is an anomaly in the state of Oregon. Most cities' urban growth boundaries are larger than their city limits. So because our city limits is greater than our urban growth boundary, the area between our urban growth boundary and our city limits deals with forest land statewide goals, because we have forest zones that the city of Astoria manages, which is not common for cities, something a county typically would do.
Yes.
And we did a bill lands inventory, it's been now, we're on city council, I think. Yeah, something like that. We are slightly below our 20-year land need right now. And so where we are in a deficit is in low-density residential zoning districts. We could go into a whole lot more on that, but I won't, because it's a pretty complex issue.
So tying back to exceptions, we could take an exception to the forest land and have residential development allowed in the forest land, going to the exception process. That's the kind of thing, usually in resource zones. I don't know where other exceptions take.
Goal 16 has exceptions, the estuary goal. But yeah. So the other thing is not only do you have to have enough land, but you have to have diversity of land. So, and the diversity of housing that comes with that. So it's interesting to have low density be the deficit. It's usually the opposite. And so that's an interesting problem to have. So LUBA is the sort of the final stage in the land use process when you talk about a final decision. So it goes to the Planning Commission, let's say it's quasi-judicial, it goes to the Planning Commission, decisions made, it's then appealed to the council, and then at that point, if folks don't like it, then they take it to the Land Use Board of Appeals. This is a small group, a three-person board that is intended to help go through this appeals process at the state level. It's supposed to make it simpler. If any of you have been part of that process and Blair can probably speak to what it means to city staff when LUA appeals are generated. It's generally a lot of work for the staff. And you have to put together the entire file, and these generally don't happen around the simple issues. So your files can be multi-layers, multi-boxes, and it is a time-intensive process quite often for the local jurisdiction. And when it gets there, they can look at the decision that was made on in a number of different ways. They can look at the substance of the decision, they can look at the process that the decision was made under, and when they make their decision, can remand back to a local jurisdiction to fix, especially when it's a process issue. So that's generally, I would say that's quite often what most land use actions get nailed by.
Yeah, and going back to findings, the first thing that we look at is findings. And the reason, after the substance of your decision, they'll look at it just like normal people. I'm going to say, this just doesn't make any sense to me, or this doesn't logically follow from that, or there's no evidence in the record to support this statement. And then they'll remand it back for new findings. And if you can't make new findings, then it'll just be reversed. It very rarely are cases reversed. It'll most often be sent back, remanded for new findings, or for decisions consistent with what LUBA tells us the law is.
And the threshold isn't this all or nothing. It's really it doesn't even matter if the LUBA necessarily agrees with the decision. It's could a reasonable person come to that conclusion based upon the testimony and our presentation by the applicant and the staff report. Could a reasonable person have drawn that conclusion? So it's not even always is it right or wrong, but rather is it reasonable?
Right. Well, and when the city council is interpreting its own ordinances, LUBA can't overrule the city council unless the decision, on the face of it, reading the ordinance and reading the conclusion, there's no logical connection to it. But they have to defer to the city council's interpretation of their own ordinance. And so it's always good when you're talking about your decision to explain why you think the ordinance says what supports your conclusion.
Where, when, and what was the last decision in the city that went to LUBA?
England Marines, the England condos. Yeah, but there was the last one. But the other one that was appealed to LUBA but was never went forward was the Central School residential development that Mitch mentioned was going to develop, but Mitch withdrew his case because of the economic downturn and just didn't pursue it.
And LUBA upheld the city's decision?
LUBA remanded the decision back to the city, and they provided direction where findings needed to be modified. So it went back to the city council, findings were modified, and the permit was approved. Yeah,
More about that later.
and so ultimately the England Marine condo development was appealed to LUBA. LUBA remanded it back saying there's a few errors. City council adopted those revisions and it was cured. So it was approved.
I'm curious to know how many appeals LUBA might handle in a given year.
You're the first person to ask me that. I will look that up.
I was thinking about the boxes and boxes of stuff.
Yes.
And the 3 people.
Yes.
And thinking being on LUBA is like punishment for something.
Well,
We don't couch it that way when we try to get them on board, but
let me tell you that when you appear in front of LUBA and your arguments aren't cogent or they kind of stray away, they're very direct with you. And the LUBA people don't, all the commissioners don't look at documents. Everything's on a computer. Everything's on a computer. And it has to be in exactly their format. If it's not, they'll send it back. And there are a lot of LUBA appeal is going to can be arguing about what's in the record or the format of the record. And oftentimes Lou will send the record back and say, no, we need this or that or whatever. So that's a big part of it, is the production of the record.
If you number a page wrong,
Yeah.
it can set everything backwards all over again.
You can reverse
Curious.
the order.
Is Lou about lawyers or regular people like us?
I don't like that.
Just answer the question.
What does it sound like? Is Lou about lawyers or are they regular people with
Lawyers.
To my knowledge, they're all have law backgrounds. Lou is not, they aren't judges.
Right.
It's an administrative.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, they're all background.
Just curious.
Especially since it's so process heavy. So now the fairness issue, ex parte, bias, conflict of interest. So ex parte contact only applies to quasi-judicial decisions, and this is where I'm going to encourage Blair to jump in at any point, because at the end of the day, when you ask me a question, I may answer, and then I'm going to say, but always consult with your city attorney. So they have to be declared and described at the onset of a hearing. So if you had a conversation with Joe at the coffee shop and you made the mistake of making eye contact, and now they want to talk to you about it, and you couldn't get away, and then you made the mistake of getting drawn into a conversation about it, you'll want to declare that. You'll want to summarize what was said during that discussion so that the members of your commission all have the same information in front of you. You're not walking in with something more than what they had. Yes, sir.
So a question just occurred to me recently about newspaper articles and ex parte. And my thought was that, because it's been said to me, or at least implied, not directly said, that reading articles having to do with something that's going to come before you constitutes ex parte. And my thinking is that it's public. It's public information. Anybody has access to the same thing I have. The appeal, the person making the appeal, all the people that are interested that have access to it, just like, they're for public notices. We need to publicize them in the newspaper. Historically, that's been the way of getting public notice out there. So I would like to argue, I want to be able to read the article.
You
can't
just say you read the article.
You have to say you did.
But could they say, well, you should excuse yourself for that?
No.
Well,
I mean, I'm happy to say
bias.
I read the article and I believe it, I'm not going to listen to anything you say.
That's
That
bias.
would be a problem.
Yeah.
Because that was actually one of the things that was said specifically during one of our hearings by the person making the appeal. Because they were concerned, they made that a point of concern, wanted to make sure that either you didn't read it or you did read it, that you, so.
Yep,
But I was just wondering, just because it's such a public notice,
Yeah.
why it should be considered ex parte.
Well, because not everybody may have read it or may have seen the article when it came out, or so you're still walking in potentially with more information than your fellow members, and you should all be working off the same playbook.
What about an instance? Sorry, go ahead.
Just to expand on that a little bit, our newspaper posts articles to Facebook. There's, every hour there's 9 more irrelevant comments. But those comments, if I try not, like if we have a hearing continued right now, so I'm desperately trying not to look at it. But if someone were to look at it, when you declare ex parte, do you just say, I read this and this is the information I got from it, or do you need to print it all out and say this is what was there, and so we can enter all of this crap into the record? Or
Well, since your attorney's here, I'll let him answer that, but I'm guessing the answer is no, that you don't have to print it all out.
No, you don't, although if one of the, let's say the applicant asked you about it, and you said, well, I read these articles and these posts on Facebook, you could say, well, I'd like a continuation of the hearing so I can see those articles and then ask questions about it. Either side can ask members about their declaration of bias, or even without a declaration, make inquiry about that. And that used to be a popular tactic, but it's kind of lost favor because usually what happens is the person will start saying all these things you said that kind of hurts the case anyway, and then probably starts disliking the attorney on their side. So they don't ask that many questions, but the trick is just making
The onus is to say, this is the source and this is the information I got from it.
and then they ask you, were you affected by that? Or they say, what about that? Do you think, well, I didn't really pay much attention to it. I read it, and I wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page, and I wasn't something like that.
Great, thank you.
Always err on the side of caution. I would always say, if you're not sure and you don't have a chance to speak to staff or the attorney, err on the side of caution.
And to save yourself, you can always say, but I will be fair and unbiased.
Yeah.
You can always throw that one in and it'll get you off.
Thinking about getting that tattoo.
What about a circumstance where a public hearing has been closed, the decision has been postponed to another date? What are the special conditions that apply then?
So the hearing's been closed, now they're going into deliberations.
No, because the applicant wanted to submit a written rebuttal.
So we have an appeal presently, and I want to make sure that we don't talk about things that create an expectation. Under this appeal scenario, the applicant requested final written rebuttal, so that had to be granted, so that was granted. And so, in this case, the city council will be coming back to deliberate on Monday next week with regard to this item, but the hearing is closed.
Well, sort of to answer your question, I mean, if it was a really serious thing like somebody called you and said, you're going to vote for me, I'm going to shoot you down. You might want to close that to the parties. And I got this, I don't think it's going to affect me, but I got this one. On the other hand, oftentimes in trials, the judge will tell someone, there'll be an objection to testimony or something. The judge will tell the jury, I want you to disregard that, which is a mental trick that most people can't. But that's what your job would have to be at the period of time when the record's closed. If somebody, or you see information about that's relevant, is you have to disregard it. And pretend like it never happened. That can't take part in. I mean, you can't sit up there and say, well, after this thing was closed, I learned, and that's going to make my decision, because you're going to get over it.
Yeah.
I have had a problem with that. I did have a funny instance with a constituent when I couldn't talk to him about this issue at all. And he said, I don't want to talk to you about it, I just want to tell you what I think.
What are you saying?
So, and this next example is kind of a new thing, but it actually happens to deal with the appeal hearing that the council's dealing with right now. Won't talk about the details, but the scenario, which was at the lower level commission, a commissioner, after the hearing was closed, talked about the research they had done online during the hearing and brought that up after the hearing was closed. That right there is an ex parte contact. And so the way that ex parte contact was cured was the city council holding what's called a de novo hearing, meaning all new testimony that was received after the hearing was closed, was then legally entered into the record.
So I guess I have a question about that. What do you do when somebody on your commission brings up something that is ex parte that they haven't cleared at that point? Where do we go? Because it's happened multiple times now, other than kick them off the commission.
Well, I mean, if the opportunity presents itself, would not be appropriate for a chair to say, excuse me, that's not part of our record, we can't consider that. And just stop it right there. The case that we're thinking about, everybody was sitting over that table squirming very uncomfortably. But actually, everything worked out. But I suppose I could have stood up to win, and that's not part of the record, we can't change that. But it kind of surprised all of us.
Well, this has happened multiple times, so I can figure out how we. Unfortunately, those individuals don't even show up to these trainings.
As commission members, though, you do have responsibility to not only hold yourself accountable, but your fellow commissioners as well. And so, like Blair said, having the chair essentially just gavel it down, is one way to do it. But then you, if you're not the chair, but it's struck you and nobody seems to have either picked up on it yet or there's stunned silence, it's not inappropriate for any commission member to say, you know what, I'm uncomfortable with that, we haven't discussed it, and as far as I'm concerned, this should not be included in this discussion or part of the record. But,
And if you have something that you want researched, just send a note to staff. And I can research things and then send it out to everyone so that everybody's on the same playing field. It's that you're not supposed to have your independent research that not everybody has. So there is an opportunity. So if you have a question, please contact me. I will make sure that the questions are answered either in the hearing or by email beforehand.
And that can happen after the staff reports.
Yes.
Published. Okay,
Yes.
Okay, another part of ex parte contact is if you make site visit, which I always encourage people to do, you need to declare that you made that site visit and what you looked at and what you saw that day. Talking to your staff is not ex parte contact. They are your experts in your support system as you move through your decision-making process. And you can clearly have ex parte contact that doesn't lead to bias, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But someone can talk to you, and it doesn't mean that you can't make a decision based upon facts and the information presented in front of you, unless it does. And then you have to declare that, and then you have to make some decisions. So, which makes me feel like too biased first, but we'll do conflict of interest. This is the most easy and the most difficult one to discuss. Generally, when people are saying conflicts of interest, what they really mean is bias. General public, oh, you're friends with Don, of course you're going to vote for him. That's not a conflict of interest. That would fall under bias. Conflict of interest has a very definite meaning, and in the case of an actual conflict of bias, it's where you would benefit or someone in your family would benefit, positive or negative, you'd benefit or you'd be impacted by the decision. There'd be an actual financial impact to you, specifically you or your family. Whereas a potential conflict of interest is could be. That really applies across the board. There are exceptions to this. When you belong to a large class of people, so you sit on a nonprofit board, and the entity may have an application in front. Just because you're on the board, you're not making nonprofit board. If you're making money, you need to join that board. But if you're on a nonprofit board, you're not making money. You are not financially benefiting from that decision. There's a number of exemptions which I would encourage you to talk to Blair about if you want to dive into those, and maybe you should. But so conflict of interest, you announce it before any decision, and that's really when it takes place during that initial discussion at the hearing. Is there bias? Is there ex parte contact? Is there conflict of interest? You do not need to recuse yourself under potential conflict of interest. You just need to state that you have this potential conflict, that it does not affect your ability to make a fair and impartial decision, versus an actual conflict of interest where you actually are going to benefit, or your family member is going to benefit or be impacted financially by it. Then you don't take part in the discussion, you not take part in the vote. Then there's this little weird piece here, which I'm happy to have Blair explain how this ever made it in. Unless we need you to vote so we can have a quorum. So Blair, take it away.
Well, we have that situation.
Yes, and my advice to you is, one, hopefully your commission's been interacting with your attorney or your staff, so someone's aware this is going to happen, so that in the event that you know there's going to be a lack of quorum, you move that date if you have that possibility.
So whenever staff is starting to call around frantically saying, hey, are you going to be here? That's because we're starting to get worried that there's a lack of a quorum, or else there's maybe not enough people to participate because they're recusing themselves.
Right.
And that's when, if you have an applicant that says, I want my hearing tonight, that's when we're calling Blair, and we're invoking what's called the rule of necessity. Rule of necessity. It's not fun for commissioners.
And so the way that vote works is you're allowed to sit on a committee or a council to make a quorum, and you're allowed to vote. You just aren't allowed to talk. So it's just the way it works.
Yeah. So now the bias. This is a little less, if you thought the last one might not be straightforward, this is being a little less straightforward. Really bias is that you have gotten yourself to the point that you are no longer able to make an impartial decision. You know this about yourself. You may have actively been opposing or supporting, but it doesn't usually work. But you've been actively advocating in a position that is contrary to what the applicant may be trying to achieve or what the public may want, you just are aware that you cannot be thoughtful in your decision-making process. This is kind of one of those self-reflection moments. It's totally on you. You're the one that makes this decision, if you are biased or not. You can be challenged on it, and it can be challenged through the process. Your bias was impacted the decision-making process. It doesn't even mean that everyone had to go with you on it. It's the fact that you were biased is enough to put that process into arrears, and now you're dealing with multiple appeals. So you need to be thoughtful about yourself and have a little self-talk before you come into the meeting about, I really don't like this, but I really believe that I cannot make a decision without being, I don't care what anybody else says now, I'm really past it, you should recuse yourself, but you don't have to.
Bias can take a lot of different forms. I mean, you could be biased against the issue, one of the participants in the proceedings. You could be biased against a particular law, say, I'm just trying to enforce this law. And really, what you should do is sit and say, would I be happy with me sitting on this case if I was the applicant? Would I be fair? Do you think I would be fair and impartial to my important issue? If I was the applicant, would I want me sitting on there? And if the answer is no, you should recuse yourself. They can challenge you for bias all different ways. You can always cure yourself by saying, yes, I believe that, but I can't be fair and impartial, and I'll make my decision for the facts of this case. And the law, ordinances of the city of Astoria, and that will save you every single time. But so you have to kind of ask yourself, you're really going to work that hard to keep on the case. Are you biased? If you challenge your bias and there seems to be some substance there, you might need the better part of honor just to say, okay, fine, I'll sit down. So anyway, it is definitely a self-call.
Yeah, and I guess when I had my hand up earlier to ask that question, if I'm running for re-election and I have a competitive election, so there's a lot of discussion, and I'm putting my position out there clear where I stand, they do too, and I get elected and I have this record, public record, of my standing for a certain thing, and this certain thing comes up before me in a quasi-judicial situation. Even if I say I'm not biased, I have shown a clear bias publicly over time, and I can be called on that.
Well,
right?
Tom, you just happen to identify probably the worst issue in bias. Have you heard of Peter Hoover?
Yeah, I think
that's the Peter Hoover case exactly. And what the appellate court said is, look, the voters elected this person for this reason. He can't sit on as long as he's saying, I can be fair and impartial. I have my own strong feelings, but I can apply the law to these facts. Even though I have strong feelings about it, I can't get him off of there. And they give special deference to a situation like you say, when it's a political decision and it's a discretionary call. So,
yeah, I think in Peter's case, they came after him after the fact, not did he sit up there and say, I have a bias, but I can make a good decision, or did he just make a decision? They came back and said, you're biased.
No, before the hearing started, they challenged Peter's ability to sit on the case and questioned extensively.
So, okay.
And Peter said at least a half a dozen times, yes, but I can be fair and impartial, and I'm going to make my decision based on the facts of the law.
So again, that goes a long way to state that you can be fair and impartial.
Right, and it's an interesting case if you want to read it, especially interesting since it's from Cousins County and a lot of people love Peter.
It is important that just simply saying it though, you need to believe. You need to believe that. So, so it's one of those very gray areas. There is an ethics commission in the state of Oregon that these kind of issues can be brought in front of, and there are actually fines that can be levied against people if they're found to be in violation of ethics in the state of Oregon. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind. You are all government bodies. You're all part of government bodies. Your body itself is not government. I saw that. I caught myself. But so you are subject to public meeting laws. You're subject to public record laws. You're subject to the ethics of the state of Oregon. You are an extension of the city. And as such, your decision-making processes aren't about you. They're about what the policies and the goals and the ordinances of your city state, and that's how you make your decisions. So it's just something to keep in mind. You are the government.
Go back to conflict of interest. Not worried about the slide, but
Okay.
several times, if a commissioner has a conflict of interest because they are involved in that particular project. As a general contractor, for instance, and my sister is an architect, oftentimes we have a conflict of interest of a project that's coming before the commission. We understand that the way we've been instructed is that we won't be able to present or do anything within that. That hamstrings us as the ability to carry out our job or profession. But what's the reasoning behind that, and are we understanding that correctly?
If you've been getting that counsel from your teacher,
So,
I prefer that you hear from
am I reading that correctly, first of all? It's been a while since we went through the
You
training.
can step down and make a presentation.
Right.
You can.
Okay. That's good news.
But you obviously can't vote on it.
Right.
Well, no, but it's more making the presentation if you're not allowed to talk to the commission as the applicant.
There's nothing that prohibits you from stepping down and not participating in that.
Yeah, so where does this come from? Because I actually had to do with this as staff, and I've been told to be with that. And this is where differences of opinions and attorneys would say. The prior city attorney,
Right.
Ginny Snow, had a different opinion. And I actually had to go before the Historic Landmarks Commission at my house. And then the city attorney told me that I, as staff, could not address the Landmarks Commission as an applicant. And so there can be different positions on this.
Well, and there are different factual situations too. I mean, if you've got a bias, we have had a council person say, well, I really don't like this person who's the applicant. I'm going to step down and bias, but can I testify to the commission about that? And I said, well, you can, but I really discourage that. But if you're the applicant and you're just presenting factual information about the application, there is no reason why. I mean, there could be a suggestion that because you're the applicant or you're supporting the applicant, the commission will vote your way, but that's going to happen whether you talk or not.
Yeah, once we know you step down, we know you're the one doing the project.
Exactly.
We already know.
It's never made sense to us.
I'd rather hear from you.
One of the reasons why we ask questions.
There's nothing in the law that prohibits you from, or the city ordinances from addressing your commission.
it's a perception issue, right? That your very presence is going to have greater influence than anyone else's in the room because you sit with them in general. And yes, you do know that it's them when they step down or they're not present. They don't even step down, they're not present on the podium. But there's also some benefit when opportunities present themselves, and they don't always, to have in some cases, if you have a consultant or somebody else working with you, having them, you're still in the room and it still has that feel, but you're not the one looking them in the eye telling them what to do. But
So, another question down the same line, let's say somebody does have a bias, we've had this come up, and recently I made a recommendation, if you have that bias, you shouldn't be here, you should be down here. It sounds like that's really not the place for them to be either.
Well, I mean, in the situation I just think it's unseemly for somebody to come down and say, well, I happen to know this guy is the applicant, I think he's a liar and a cheat, and I believe what he says.
So maybe it's not personal,
But,
bias.
then, you know, if the commission or council is concerned about things, then they can, vote to disqualify the member from participating under our code. So if that happens to be a situation, that can happen also.
Okay.
that's always tricky. But
I think in some of our decisions, there's individuals on our commission that do have some pretty good bias, and they declared that bias. And so, kind of where's the best place for them? If they really feel strongly about that opinion, it seems to me that they should be out here testifying against the opinion.
well, no, they should accuse
Or
themselves.
What
Period.
I'm hearing is they
Yeah.
shouldn't be involved in the process at all. Yeah.
One step deeper on that, what if a commissioner exposes bias during, after the proceedings start? Can you take a vote then and boot them out, or is it too late at that point?
It's usually what
Like
comes
saying,
up.
yeah, bias wasn't stated early, but then they make a statement and you're like, oh, clearly there's some bias here. What's the procedure at that point?
Probably would prefer to correct that in findings. I mean, he says,
Yeah.
I thought about this a lot of times, and I don't think it's all right. It should say this, not this, and that's the way I vote. And that's just, loose, he made that statement, because that's not part of the decision.
Okay.
Your
So-
decision is based on the order that's entered and the findings that contain in that order, not necessarily anything that's said.
Okay.
So the other piece of all, does anyone have any other questions on conflict? So another thing that you have to be conscious of as a governmental body is not meeting in forums and talking about this outside of the noticed public process. So that seems really simple. So you have 5 people, 3 you can't get together and discuss the decision. That's pretty straightforward. You also can't have staff contact each member, get an idea of what they're going to vote for, how they're going to do it. That is considered inappropriate activity as well. It's a violation of the public meeting law. I have witnessed a situation where the chair met individually with each planning commission member to tell them how they were right or wrong in their opinions, went down the line, and then they met at a hearing. Of course, none of this was disclosed because it was one-on-one conversations. And members of the public found out about it, go figure, and it became quite a brouhaha, and it put the whole decision turned it upside down. And so those are violations of public meeting laws. If you get into a Facebook conversation and all of you are starting to jump in and provide input on it, and it's about the issue at hand, that's violation of the public meeting laws. So it's my recommendation is you just keep yourself during that 2-week period. You don't talk to anybody. You stay in your bathroom most of the time. But it does get tricky in small towns especially. Everybody meets at the coffee shop. I know I talked about this last time, but it is imperative that you simply put your blinders on when someone approaches you. I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about that. And hopefully you can gracefully exit. If you can, then you're in that position, making sure you declare it. Err on the side of caution every time. And you will protect yourself, you'll protect the city and the decision. So this is my last slide of note. So there's one little piece of rule that applies only in the coastal zone, and that's this federal consistency. And that makes that coastal management program that much more important in the state of Oregon because, again, it puts all the power at the local level. So in general, federal actions which are either done by a federal agency, permitted by a federal agency, or funded by a federal agency, or all three of those things, generally do not require local land use permits. Anywhere else in the country are not required except in the coastal zone. And so when federal action is taking place, they have to provide notice. They have to provide, then the state, the LCD, provides notice that this federal activity is happening. The state, the LCD, will review all of the enforceable policies that are present in any of the state entities that have a relationship to this type of project, whether it's permitting or some other enforceable action under like ODFW. And then they will look at your comprehensive plans and your local ordinances to ensure consistency. Now, a lot of times that's done because you've gone through a public process and they can say, okay, they got their conditional use, the city has said this complies with rules and their ordinances. We might take just another quick run through and then we'll say, yes, it's consistent. But should you come back and say this is not consistent, then the federal action cannot take place. Now, they also have the right to appeal and go through all those processes too, but this is unusual, and this is one of the benefits of the Coastal Management Program, and it's one of the special and unique features of the coastal communities who are part of coastal management programs, that they have this strong influence on federal actions that are taking place in our area. So, think LNG right now down in Coos Bay. You have your own issues up here. Right down in Coos Bay, they're going through one right now. It's called Jordan Cove, and we've received 20,000 comments to date. There are issues at the state level, there are issues at the local level, and the applicant and the federal government federal government's patiently waiting, the applicant is not. Federal government is waiting to see if this is going to comply with all the applicable enforceable policies in the state of Oregon. If it does not, then it will not go through. So that is valuable, and that just is one more piece of how important at the local level it is to have strong policies, to have clear, concise ordinances, and to create as many enforceable policies as you can. And that's part of our job when you're developing ordinances, is to run them through that lens to make sure that they can be used in those times when federal actions are coming to the forefront. So that is the end. This was just interesting stuff if you're a planning wonk. But from a city perspective, ORS 227 really governs your processes. 197 is around the comprehensive plan process. 195 is for that planning coordination, which we talked about a little earlier, and then 92 is around subdivisions or partitions in its own animal. So I don't know if you have any more questions. So I told Barbara that one of the things that I wanted to ask folks tonight is one-on-one sessions are good, hopefully. From my perspective, they're awesome. But are there other things you want to learn about? Whether it's a goal, whether it's some issue that you see brewing and you'd just like to get some foundational understanding of either the statewide plan goals or other processes that are going to feed into it. I can bring in folks from DLCD, I can bring in other agency people or other partners, depending on what the issue is, to help with workshops if they're of interest. One of the things that came out of this last go-around when we did one-on-one last January, so it's been a year, was one of the commissioners was interested in changes to how USGS determines the vertical data. And so, I don't think any of the other commissioners were there, but a workshop was held, and surveyors were there, which is actually the part of that we would have focused on. We had folks come in from FEMA, USGS, our office around the floodplain coordinator, and had a really nice discussion about what it means from a practical perspective. And so it can be anything. But I just would ask you to think about it and let Barbara and Brett know if there are other things that you're interested in. I said this last Thursday in Warrington, when I looked across a room of, I don't know, 50 or 60 people easily, most of them members of the public, and I said what an amazing turnout it was for a Thursday night. Maybe we need to find more things to do in Warrington. And so I sort of, but I know you're all here because this is actually intimately involved with your job as commission members, and so I appreciate that, and you're letting me stand up here and chatter at you for the last hour and a half.
It looks like you're trying to make a personal effort to satisfy those folks in Warrington by keeping your presence in your presence.
See, I will let them know that too. In fact, I'm going to leave it in all of them, see if anyone ever notices. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's bad. But I do have pictures of Astoria. Okay, just remember, I knew where I was. So anyway, if you have anything, yes, sir.
I just, one of the things that kind of often is, for me, is how do you help the public stay on task?
That's a great topic.
Trades, whatever, have a discussion about how do we help them to do that? Because so often what they're bringing up in testimony has nothing to do with their criteria.
Sure.
They just don't get that.
We had a Friends of Land Use kind of committee that we created a number of years ago, and the whole goal was to help educate the public on how to provide good public testimony. We had over 100 people show up. Of course, we had
I was
issues.
going to say, nobody should know.
We had a lot of issues. And so we were kind of helping people gear up for those issues. We didn't take a position on them, but we wanted them to be effective. But that was a pretty impressive turnout. People really do want to know. And because land use is so personal, you could get probably a fairly decent turnout if it was marketed the right way, if it's just workshop, come. But if you could make it so that they're actually going to walk out with some tools that are going to help them in the future, I think that it would be well done. And I think it's super beneficial. And it also is an opportunity for them again to see their commission members as people, not them, they, against us, we. So I think that would be a great thing.
Well, one of the things I think can help is that in the statement that's written.
Yeah, that does help.
Oak says the issues should be refined to issues in this case which are outlined on the document on the table. Well, that's not very helpful for most people because they don't need document on the table. If there could actually be a decent summary of what the important issues were in the case, and Bruce certainly did that in last time we had, that was very effective. That I think would improve testimony. I mean, especially with like design review issues. Even if you say it, you get it.
Well, all the criteria listed out usually in those meetings, that we go through the criteria, and the testimony that we have is
that's
totally
one of the funny things about land use is if you're granting a petition or you have to address each one of the criteria, right? Well, as a matter of fact, most people don't care about 99% of the criteria. There's only like one or two things that they're going to be talking about. And most people know what those are the important things. They can be summarized easily at the beginning of the case, and that can help in the testimony. Give people an idea of what they're focused on. And certainly people can come and raise good issues. And that's the whole point of a public hearing. But if they can remain a little more focused, better for them.
And that really is a chair function, of helping kind of sideboard when folks are providing testimony or someone's starting to wander because they're getting nervous or passionate, bring them back to the point. Because but some people are going to come up, they're going to use their 3 minutes or whatever you give them for whatever. And you thank them for their testimony and move on. You're not going to address it. It wasn't relevant. It wasn't pertinent to the situation. But they needed that 3 minutes to tell you something. Not everybody recognizes also that they're there for a specific reason. Like sometimes they'll just take advantage of the opportunity to come up and talk to you. So again, the chair can say, would you like to address the criteria? Are you aware that there's a project in front of us? No. But making sure that the chair is doing their job is also very helpful for the public. And usually the first person that has to go through it, by the time you get to the end, they're a lot more prepared for coming up. I also would say when they're talking to staff, that staff urge them to provide written testimony. So even if they go off the rails speaking, hopefully they've been able to be more thoughtful and focused in their written testimony, which you will have read in advance and all that good stuff. So, but yeah, I've never heard of workshops or things like that.
I think we saw that at our last city council meeting too. We saw people that came up and actually started saying, well, I have a lot to say, but I'll focus on what the criteria is. And we have few people actually do that.
That's great.
So, what is, so far in my experience, unusual, because people are emotional usually, and it's an emotional appeal. It's not a pragmatic appeal.
So you're encouraging education, which I also encourage. The goals of the land use are for ordinary citizens to be part of that board up there. So how much education is too much education for someone sitting up there?
Can I say, is there such a thing?
Yeah, I also question that, but.
I don't think you can have too much. I mean, it can become repetitive or boring. Only two of you show up.
Should I go get a law degree in land use, or if I really want to do it, or?
Oh.
You know, you would like be one of us more. What? Yeah. Tired of being a regular person.
Yeah.
I mean, how much? There probably isn't too much I could learn, but
I really don't think there is. I suppose that I can envision a scenario where it sort of gets in your way, where you get bogged down in the philosophy of land use and not the actual application in front of you. Again, your chair. Thank you very much. That was very educational for all of us, but perhaps now we can focus on the application.
See, that's a danger on the chair now.
And so the rest of you commission members, that was very educational. Perhaps we can focus on that.
Great, thank you.
So one thing I want to say about staff and a recommendation, and particularly, this is not as much for the city councilors, because city councilors, if there's an appeal, they're getting a recommendation or a decision from a local body. But for the Historic Landmarks Commission, the Design Review Commission, the Planning Commission, we have a staff recommendation. That's just a starting point. That's really just a point to say, hey, someone has looked at this and they provided something to be able to chew on, to be able to respond to. You're not obliged to take the staff recommendation. And if you go in a different direction, the staff has tough skin. That's what we as planners are prepared for that. And if you go in a different direction, it's no sweat off our backs. You're the decision maker.
Well, let me put it differently. If you counter what the staff says, and the public doesn't like it, staff can say, hey, look, you wouldn't.
But you also need to have a reason why you disagree, and to say why you feel the criteria, and Ian,
Yeah, I was just going to say, in my experience as a planner, professionally, I rarely would recommend that an application be denied unless there's really strong reasons why it shouldn't be based on the facts presented, right? So most of the time, staff is going to be working with an applicant to try to find them a way to get their project approved, and the recommendation is going to be for approval. But as a commissioner, you don't have to agree. And you can, again, if you have good reasons to come up with different findings for denial, that's totally fine. And I don't think in most cases staff is going to be offended.
No.
right. So and the thing is there are times in Astoria where we do not make recommendations.
Yeah.
And those are some times where there's a lot of discretion, and we're saying, and particularly more the Design Review Committee or Commission and Landmarks Commission saying, we need your input. Tell us what you think. And that's kind of where we have some of those scenarios where we would make a recommendation. As a professional planner, where I worked before here in Hillsborough, it was the city's policy that staff didn't ever make a recommendation. So it was just a thing that they did there, where it was the board of commission's purview. So you'll see that periodically in Astoria where there's not a recommendation.
Well, we like you giving this recommendation, so please don't stop.
So the other thing, this is now Now on to a different topic. Oregon Ethics Commission. They are a group that if there is a question, you're always going to be able to reach out to staff, reach out to the city attorney. You have the ability to ask them questions as well. And then there's the yearly reporting that comes along with being as a part of a land use body, where, and for those new boards and commission members, you're going to be contacted this spring, saying you need to fill out this whole survey in terms of not a survey. It's a document that says has some questions to make sure that you're meeting the state of Oregon ethics standards. So, as a same group, they can answer a question if there's something that really is bigger and broader. One thing I would say for the new commissioners is make sure you fill that out.
Yes.
They will find you, and we have had commissioners in Astoria who have received fines from the state of Oregon for not completing these.
Now, they are generous. They will try to not get to that point, and they will beg you several times by saying, we will fine you if you do not answer this. But ethics laws apply to all of you that are in commission positions, and it's the law prohibits the abuse of your position. You're flaunting it as somehow intimidating or otherwise using your position in an appropriate way, receiving gifts, disclosing confidential information, because there are instances, particularly on the council, where you're in a closed session and you're not supposed to be talking about things. And if you use it to gain employment or to cause people to be unemployed, those are abuses of the ethics laws. I would say to Brett's point and Barbara and Ian's points about we don't take offense when you overturn a decision recommendation that we made. I would say that if you knew how many proposals come through the door that never see the light of day because staff has been working with that person and it has just been determined you simply are not going to make it through this process, and they step away. So when it gets to this point, and then it's because the applicant is aware of the issues that they need to tackle, and whether or not they've met that criteria then becomes your decision. But staff probably has helped turn away a lot of business that would otherwise be coming in front of you.
Or turn the client into a perspective, acceptance of it.
Yes.
Versus denying the whole thing because there was things that they just had no clue about.
Yeah.
So we appreciate how our staff works with the clients in that way. We see that all the time.
Yeah, as Ian said, you're trying to help them toward a path towards yes, and if that's possible, that's where you're trying to go. So no, you can't do much information. We can have public workshops. Yes.
So twice since I've been on the council, there have been quasi-judicial matters that came to council that were proposals that were denied at one of either the design review or historic landmarks, and then were appealed to council. And when they came to council, they came with a revised proposal. So it's an interesting situation where council was considering. So technically, we were either upholding or denying or overturning the previous decision, but really it wasn't, because it was a new proposal.
Right.
Because it was, are there any particular things in a situation like that we would want to be considering, or does that happen a lot in other places? It's happened twice since I've been on council.
Well, I can imagine someone whose application is being appealed would say, boy, I heard them, got to think about this. I would like to address the concerns that were raised and see if this will work its way through the process, which is what you get when you get this revised proposal in front of you. But is it common? Why are denials that common would be one of the things. But I always encourage applicants to work with folks that might be having challenges with what they're trying to put forward, to talk to them and understand what the issues are, because sometimes they're very valid and weren't things that the applicant thought about, weren't even on their radar, and can result in a better project and one that then satisfies a lot of the issues that were raised. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Blair?
No, I've kind of shared them. I think problem is that we have a lot of commissions that are tasked with reviewing these projects, and when it comes up with city council and drafting the project, they're bypassing that process. And I guess it's the extent to which the city council wants to allow that to happen. And I think it'd be legitimate to deny the appeal on the grounds that this, this hasn't been, was presented to by an appeal, wasn't considered the law. I think that's a legitimate basis for denial, although, I don't know, we've had it twice, and I'm with you, I think there's something wrong with that process.
Well, in each case, we chose it to be de novo as opposed to on the record, right? So de novo means they could bring a whole new scenario if they
No,
want
it
to.
doesn't. I mean, there's not, our code, at least my reading of the code says the application has to be filed, and the application presented and appealed. It is a brand new application if you change it. De novo means you can have new evidence. It does say you can have a new application.
Right, but that does open, I mean, that's what I mean, that's what opens up to all sorts of different things that really totally change the nature
Well,
of
there's
the
a lot of permutations. I mean, it could come out with appeal, and you can say, you can approve it as a condition, that you change this or that, as suggested by the applicant. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways of, a lot of ways of dealing with it. It's up to the council to decide which is the best way to deal with it.
Windows will read it.
I'm so sorry.
So one more question. We've got, one commissioner has made a decision or voted on a decision and then it does go to appeal to city council. Most of us have been instructed that those commissioners should not go and attend that meeting or make a presentation at that meeting. That's hard for some of our commissioners to understand. And this kind of goes back to some of the commissioners that aren't present here. How can we help them to get up to speed with the discussion that's been here tonight, as well as encourage them to follow some of those recommendations?
So you're talking about a commissioner coming up in front of council as a citizen to speak.
Yeah, we've got,
Or even just attend the
That-
meeting
that
and be a
fact-
fly on the wall.
I mean, that fact situation comes up in a lot of situations. When I was on county commission, where we make a decision, one of the county commissioners decided that she didn't like it, and so she'd go around the county advocating that decision. My opinion is that a council or commission speaks as a body. They vote, and that's one decision of the body. And it's not appropriate for a member of that body to come out there and then criticize, hey, live or die with the decision of the body. And I think that's the way the system works the best. It's pretty impossible for people to distinguish between the body and the member. But there's not, I mean, it is a free country and people can do what they want. You have a First Amendment right to say what you want. So, I mean, you can't prohibit somebody from doing that. It's just, I guess it's sort of like the teamwork concept or like spirit of how the body operates.
Do you have the same opinion about a commissioner coming before council and giving 3 minutes on perhaps elucidating why the commission voted the way they did? I mean, in favor, you know?
Well, I mean, the commission's going to adopt an order with findings. That's what it speaks. It's not what comments a person might have about it. It's not what was said during the deliberation. It's the order that's signed. It's the only thing who's going to look at it. It's the only thing the reports are going to look at. That's what the decision is.
Are you saying I'm not getting lectured?
No, I don't do that. You know, I'm on a commission now, and I would not come before council and speak unless I was asked by the mayor to do so. I doubt that's going to happen.
If there's an errant commissioner, would it be inappropriate for just someone a note to send a communication to them? This is behavior that's not conducive, it's not part of their role.
That's kind of, I've been thinking about this kind of, that's kind of like, how do you recommend your wife or your spouse
Very careful already.
You have to be really careful when I handle things like that. The teamwork thing, every member is a member, and I think you have to start that by having teamwork start at the council level. You're not going to correct it later on by somebody being a rogue member. We have city council members who are rogue members, and it makes it very uncomfortable for me, and makes meetings last very long. We have a good city council right now.
Yeah, but the meetings still go really long. It's our fault.
No. Mostly.
Are there any other questions or anything else you want to get out since you have all of your favorite people here in your planning role? Okay. Well, gee, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Stay on the phone. Thanks, Lisa.
What might be helpful is how to so I think we can include that here. It's almost those that are so they're